Hey, good morning. All right, let's rock. So I'm Tom Ballinger. I work for Zapata Racing. Thank you. We have built a jet-powered personal mobility device, and we think it's potentially applicable to SOF. All right, I'm going to push through this pretty quickly so we can have a discussion if anybody has questions at the end. Okay, so just to cut to the chase, we have a column for what we have done so far and what we think it can do. So far, we're around 90 miles an hour. We've taken it up to about 500 feet. This is changing daily. We're flying every day, so the envelope gets expanded a little bit at a time. The 6 turbine engines that power this thing are run off of fuel that we're wearing in a small backpack right now. So the endurance is low at the moment because we're carrying the fuel on our person, because it's the most elemental flying device we think that's ever existed. So safety, everybody's going to be concerned about safety for this thing. It does have engine out capability. It's got 4 thrust engines and 2 yaw engines. You can lose a thrust engine and a yaw engine and continue the mission. You can lose 2 thrust engines and descend safely. Triple redundant controls, 3 channel controls, 2 wired and 1 wireless. And the control is in the right hand. It's like a pistol grip in the right hand, which there's some human factors issues there for a tactical application, which we are working through. We've got mouth control approach and some other optional piloted approaches as well. The magic is actually not the thrust or the board, it's the stability that goes with it. It fights back. It doesn't like to be moved. And so it takes your intent and turns it into a manifest movement, but it nulls out all the chaos and oscillation and everything else, so you don't spend a ton of your time flying the board. You may have noticed that the operator's body position is fairly relaxed. He's not spending a lot of his cognitive abilities on flight controls. It's got the independent engine electronics and redundant fuel supplies that you would expect from a flying device. There's a heads-up display in the cockpit to get, or in the helmet, I should say, which I guess is the cockpit, to transmit any issues with the aircraft and airspeed. And then the engines we actually tear down. They're off-the-shelf small turbine engines, but we 3D print turbine cooling so the bearings are cooler and lubricated better. So we came from water recreation. So the cruise line commercials and the resort commercials with the water jet packs and all that, that's our stuff. And that's where the stability was born. So the stability and the pilot vehicle interface was born in the water recreation domain. And we realized just how limiting that water thrust is. So instead of vectored thrust from water, we replaced it with rapidly expanding air from a turbine engine. And we end up with sort of an accidental flying device, which is quite unique. And the magic, like I said, is the stability. It's got a very intuitive interface, so you don't spend a lot of time on flight controls. And obviously, the high performance thrust. We carry 9 times our own weight, and that'll scale as well. So what's the point? So the Flyboard Air probably has some very limited special ops applications as it sits today. It's not a fantastic aircraft, but it's a pretty awesome grappling hook. It's a pretty awesome rope ladder. So for the ground operator, having the ability to cross domains, to go ship to ship, over the beach, ship to shore, urban vertical dominance, things like that is pretty ideal. But we know that it's going to have to evolve and be more like a thing to have wider acceptance in the wider SOF community, or even in the conventional force or DHS, et cetera. So starting at the bottom left of the slide, the optionally piloted jet bike, the same stability programs, the same thrust ratios that make the Flyboard work. We'll scale up into a jet bike that's more of a cockpit and can handle other systems, protective devices, ballistic armor, signature management, electronic warfare, et cetera. And then it can be optionally piloted, so it would go in either remotely or autonomous. And then because we have a very high carrying capacity for our individual weight, we think it's pretty ideal for litter carrier for emergency transport. We think that in something the size of a Pelican case, you could unpack our device, put a litter on it, and do an emergency evac to a more legitimate LZ, so you get a more comprehensive medical evacuation. And then runway agnostic fixed-wing UAS launcher. We're very loud and our endurance isn't great, but lifting heavy stuff straight up is kind of our wheelhouse. So I think we can do a vertical Gray Eagle or a vertical Predator to either carry it up to 10,000 feet straight up and kick it off, or create a virtual runway a few meters off the ground and fly over whatever that terrain or maritime surface is or whatever, if there's a con-op that supports. And then the obvious one is remote autonomous cargo delivery. And for our vehicle weight, 9X right now, something that scale that'll carry 1,000 pounds or 2,000 pounds is probably a 400 or 500 pound device. And that's it. Happy to take questions. I've left some brochures laying around, and thank you for your time. Yes, sir.
You mentioned loud. How loud is it, and what's your MTBF or maintenance cycle?
Yeah, so obviously the envelope expansion part of this, we don't have full MTBF. The engines we're trying to get 30 hours out of, but when you build that 5 minutes at a time, that's a lot of cycling. And we're not satisfied with our off-the-shelf engines that we use, so we are interested in developing our own engines and making our own custom ones. So just like in the power and energy domain, there's a lot of small batteries, and there's a lot of huge batteries, but there's not a lot in the middle. We're finding that with turbine engines too. There's a lot of small toy and kit stuff, and then a lot of giant ones, but there's not a lot in that valley. We like to fill in that valley, and we know that to be usable as a capability, that MTBF needs to be something that lasts months and not days or weeks, unless the customer were to want something that's fairly expendable. Low cost, I'm going to use it 5 times and turn it back into you and just gets rebuilt, which saves a maintenance issue on the backside. As far as noise, it's probably about 110 decibels standing near it. Obviously hearing protection, it's very loud, and it's high pitched too, so it's annoying as well. But because it's high pitched, it tends to not travel very far. It dissipates quickly and it doesn't turn corners. And part of our technology roadmap is acoustic management, as well as other obvious things about protection and redundancy and so forth. For a tactical capability, you'd want all the performance and all of the signature management that you can handle, so that the operator's mind is not on what he's flying on, but what he's going to go do when he gets there. Other questions? Yes, sir. I love the FAA. So I have a military aviation background, and I didn't work with the FAA too much. The FAA is perfectly happy letting you kill yourself. They just want to make sure that you don't hurt anyone else in the process. So the FAA has actually been quite accommodating. In our current configuration, well, we have a configuration that's ultralight compliant. So in the ultralight domain, you don't need a pilot's license. You don't need a medical certificate or anything. And because this is targeted to ground operators rather than aviators, that actually suits us quite well. So we fly under Part 103 in the US, which is ultralight ops. And then when we get into the jet bike and some of the other stuff, we'll need experimental certifications. But yes, we're talking to the FAA. I've been to the principal's office already with those guys, but to their credit, they've been quite accommodating. And then we have international issues too. Like the French airspace, we have no special designation, but they give us a little box of airspace we can fly in, and we're pursuing other international opportunities as well. Okay. All right. Thank you for your time. Have a great day.